The Fall of Rome, and the End of Civilization, by Bryan Ward-Perkins. This is a summary of the most important chapters. 2. The Horrors of War Experiences of Violence. The chapter emphasizes that the Germanic takeover of power was violent and disruptive for the Roman population. The Vandals' conquest of North Africa, particularly the capture of Carthage in 439, was a major shock to the region. Some areas experienced prolonged conflict, such as Gaul, where various groups fought for control for almost a century after the Rhine crossing in 406–7. The Iberian Peninsula also saw fighting between multiple groups. Sacking of Rome. The city of Rome was besieged multiple times and was eventually captured and sacked by the Goths in 410 and again by the Vandals in 455. The 410 sack was marked by starvation and cannibalism among the inhabitants before the city fell. The 455 sack by the Vandals was more systematic, with the city being looted for 14 days. Accounts of atrocities. Various historical accounts and texts describe the atrocities committed during the invasions. These accounts include moralizing tracts and chronicles that sometimes exaggerate or underplay the violence for their own purposes. Examples of violence include the rape of nuns, the killing of children, and widespread pillaging and destruction. The life of Severinus provides a picture of life in a frontier province under repeated attack, the perspective of the conquered. Romans often viewed the Germanic peoples as uncouth and beneath consideration. The invaders were aware of this, and were unlikely to have been unaffected by it. In 408, the murder of the families of Germanic soldiers serving in the Roman army led them to join the invading Goths. Moral dilemmas and responses. The chapter explores how Christian writers responded to the violence and disasters of the 5th century, questioning why God allowed such suffering. Some writers, like Orosius, attempted to show that the pagan past was actually worse than the current Christian present. Others, like Salvian, used the barbarians' behavior to criticize the Romans. The poem quoted in the chapter vividly illustrates the looting and destruction of war, despite its attempt at consolation. The impact of war. The sack of Aquileia by Attila's Huns created a moral conundrum about the status of women whose husbands were enslaved. The experience of invasion was terrible, although it was not as terrible as modern conflicts with ideological differences. Exaggeration in accounts. The accounts of violence are often exaggerated for rhetorical effect, but reflect the very real atrocities committed by armies not under tight discipline. 3. The road to defeat the Roman Empire had previously been at risk. The empire had almost collapsed during the 3rd century. It was weakened by civil wars, financial problems, and defeats against foreign enemies, but recovered due to a series of strong military leaders. This previous near collapse shows that the empire was not invulnerable, and that the balance between success and failure was delicate. Military weaknesses. The Roman military, while usually effective, experienced significant defeats. The Battle of Teutoburg Forest in 9 AD resulted in the loss of 3 Roman legions. The Battle of Hadrianopolis in 378 was a catastrophic loss for the Eastern Roman army. The Western Roman army struggled to recruit enough soldiers and resources. The significance of unity. The Germanic people's ability to unite was a crucial factor in their military strength. The Goths, initially fragmented, united after being pushed into the empire by the Huns. The need for survival in a hostile environment encouraged unity among the invaders. Limitations of Roman military strength. The Romans did not possess a significant technological advantage over their enemies. Their strength depended on their superior organization and equipment. Invasions and loss of territory. The Western Empire suffered repeated invasions that strained its resources. Italy was invaded by Goths multiple times. Gaul was devastated by Vandals, Alans, and Sueves. The Iberian Peninsula was also invaded. These invasions reduced the empire's tax base and forced the government to grant tax relief. The loss of Africa to the Vandals in 429 was a major blow to the empire's tax base. Economic crisis. The invasions led to a dramatic decrease in imperial tax revenues, which weakened the military and made defense difficult. The government struggled to pay soldiers, resorting to recruiting slaves. Internal strife. The Western Empire was plagued by civil wars and social unrest. Multiple usurpers challenged Emperor Honorius, causing further instability. These civil wars were often prioritized over fighting the Germanic invaders. The failure of self-help. The Roman citizens had to relearn the arts of war in order to defend themselves. The most successful resistance to the Germanic invasions occurred in the least Romanized areas of the empire. These areas included the Basque Country, Brittany, and Western Britain, which were able to re-establish tribal structures and effective military resistance. Missed opportunities. The chapter highlights key moments where different outcomes could have changed the course of history. A victory by Emperor Valens at Hadrianopolis in 378 might have resolved the Gothic problem. Stilicho's failure to defeat the Goths in 402 allowed them to regroup. A successful campaign against the Vandals in Africa might have enabled the empire to recover. The East versus West. Despite the common perception of the Eastern Roman Empire as always being stronger, it also experienced challenges such as defeats and invasions. The Eastern army was defeated at Hadrianopolis in 378. The East also faced the Huns. The Eastern Empire was more resilient due to its strong financial resources, a geographical position that was easier to defend, and a long period of peace with Persia. For, living under the new masters' initial violence and displacement, the Germanic settlements were preceded by periods of warfare and raiding, which caused significant disruption and suffering. The Vandals, for instance, were responsible for violence and disruption as they moved through the empire. Bishop Leo of Rome wrote about the treatment of nuns raped by the Vandals, illustrating the brutality of the times. Hydatius described the violence in Spain, associating the arrival of barbarians with the 4 scourges prophesied in the Book of Revelations. He also recounted mothers being driven to cannibalism. The life of Saint Severinus in Noricum provides a detailed picture of how people lived in a province under repeated attack. He helped the provincials deal with invaders. Cities such as Tabernia, Asturis, Iovioco, and Batavis experienced capture, sacking, and loss of life. Negotiated settlements. Despite the initial violence, settlements were often negotiated, with Germanic groups receiving land and resources in exchange for peace. The Visigoths were initially settled in Aquitaine by treaty. The Alans were granted lands in northern Gaul by the Roman general Aetius. This settlement was forcibly resisted by local inhabitants. The imperial government was capable of sacrificing its provincial subjects for short-term political gain, such as when Clermont was surrendered to the Visigoths in exchange for Arles and Marseille. Continuity of Roman structures. A significant amount of the social, administrative, and cultural framework of the Roman Empire persisted under Germanic rule. In the Ostrogothic kingdom in Italy, games continued in the circus and amphitheatre, and Roman families continued to hold office. The new rulers often relied on Roman administrators to run their kingdoms. The Christian Church, cities, secular administration, and Roman law generally continued to operate. The Germanic kings even minted their gold coins in the name of the reigning emperor in the East, as though the Roman Empire was still in existence. Power dynamics and social change. The new Germanic rulers became the dominant aristocracy, but the relationship with the existing Roman population was complex and not always one of oppression. Germanic settlers acquired wealth, particularly land, through their power and influence. The Ostrogoths in Italy had counts of the city, in charge of a military garrison, and counts of the Goths, with authority over Gothic inhabitants. These counts of the Goths had the final say in any dispute between a Roman and a Goth. Theodahad, nephew of the Ostrogothic king, aggressively acquired land in Tuscany. Romans also continued to hold positions of power and influence in the new administrations. Some Roman aristocrats served Germanic kings and prospered in their service. Native magistrates in Ostrogothic Italy were not allowed to judge a member of the ruling race. Cooperation and adaptation. There was significant cooperation between the Germanic rulers and the Roman aristocracy, leading to a mixed society. Germanic kings gave native aristocrats access to power, security of land tenure, and privileges. Roman aristocrats, in return, offered service and support at court and in the localities. The author of a sermon delivered in Ries noted that the conquerors had a Roman spirit. Romans were employed as translators and legal experts. Some Romans even entered the service of the new kings as warriors. Cassiodorus, a Roman, was a principal minister of Theoderic. Paulinus of Pella, a landowner in southwestern Gaul, was awarded an important office by a puppet emperor created by the Visigoths. Wealth and status. Although there were cases of expropriation, many Roman families maintained their wealth and status under Germanic rule. In the south and central Italy and parts of Gaul, aristocratic continuity was evident. A certain Victorianus of Hadrumetum was as wealthy as any man in Africa in 484. Even in Anglo-Saxon Britain, some Britons, Welshmen, held substantial estates and had legal status. Impact on the peasantry. While the upper classes adapted to the new order, many smallholders likely continued to work their land, though they were now paying taxes and rent to Germanic masters. In the south of the Vandals' African kingdom, Roman smallholders continued to hold leases by Roman law, but the leases were now dated by the regnal year of a Vandal king. Gradual assimilation. Over time, the distinction between Germanic rulers and Roman subjects blurred, and eventually disappeared. Goths in Italy continued to speak their native Gothic language. Some Romans learned the language of their new masters. Cyprianus, a Roman, learned Gothic and also had his sons educated in the language. The Visigoths converted to Catholic Christianity in 587. By the 7th century, there were no Romans left in northern Gaul, but only people who considered themselves Franks. The indigenous Roman population eventually adopted the identity of their masters and became Visigoths, or Franks. At the same time, the Germanic peoples adopted the culture of their subjects, including language and religion. The disappearance of comfort decline in material sophistication. There was a dramatic reduction in the quality and availability of manufactured goods. Specialized production and long-distance trade became rare, except for luxury items. The variety and quality of functional goods decreased substantially, with a decline in the middle and lower markets. In Britain, skills like building with mortared stone or brick and making pottery on a wheel disappeared entirely. The potter's wheel was not reintroduced for almost 300 years. In the Mediterranean region, there was a significant shrinkage in production rather than a complete disappearance. Domestic housing in post-Roman Italy shifted from stone and brick to perishable materials like wood. Even the dwellings of the landed aristocracy became more ephemeral. Kings and bishops appear to be among the few who continued to live in Roman-style comfort. Changes in building techniques and housing. A significant shift occurred in the materials and methods used for construction. Roman-era stone and brick structures were replaced by wooden buildings. Even the homes of the wealthy became less durable and comfortable. The change to perishable materials was not necessarily inferior, but it was a step away from the material sophistication of Roman times. Farmers' houses in the North Syrian village of Des, with their carefully squared local limestone walls and tiled roofs, demonstrate the solid and functional comfort that existed in Roman times. Disappearance of coinage. The use of coinage in daily life declined significantly in the post-Roman West. Roman coinage had been a standard feature of daily life, with a complex system of gold, silver, and copper coins. Post-Roman, copper coins disappeared from circulation, and silver and gold coins are only found in hoards. This decline in coinage indicates a reduction in economic sophistication and the disappearance of local markets. Regional variations. The timing and severity of the decline varied across different regions of the former empire. Britain experienced a rapid economic decline in the early 5th century, reverting to a level of simplicity similar to the Bronze Age. The Aegean region saw a dramatic end to prosperity around 600 AD, with great cities shrinking to a fraction of their former size and a disappearance of fine tablewares and new coins. Italy and Africa did not experience such a sharp drop in sophistication, but saw a gradual decline in a Mediterranean-wide commercial system. Constantinople was an exception. Although the city shrank in both wealth and population from its peak in the years around 500 AD, it continued to produce and use new copper coins and developed a new glazed tableware. The role of trade, the disintegration of the Roman state and the ending of security were crucial in destroying the sophisticated economy. The African provinces, which had been major exporters of tablewares and olive oil, saw a gradual shrinking of trade. The links between different shores of the Mediterranean, which had once brought complexity and wealth, now meant that the problems of one region could negatively impact another. Other factors contributing to decline. The decline was also exacerbated by other factors, such as the bubonic plague of 541 AD. Impact on daily life. The loss of the sophisticated Roman economy had a significant impact on the daily lives of people. The life of Saint Severinus highlights the difficulties faced by people in frontier provinces, with violence affecting producers, distributors, and consumers. Even local markets were disrupted, with the import of goods from afar becoming extremely difficult. Population decline. The end of the ancient economy likely led to a decline in food production and a significant drop in population. Archaeological surveys in the West have revealed far fewer rural sites from the 5th, 6th, and 7th centuries AD compared to the early empire. The decline in agriculture suggests that the land could not sustain as many people as before. Decline in higher culture. The decline in the economy also had an impact on higher human achievements, like literacy and monumental buildings. Craftsmanship and skill could not flourish in a material vacuum, with a corresponding reduction in building scale and the spread of literacy. 6. Why the demise of comfort? The end of Roman power. The disintegration of the Roman state and the loss of security are identified as crucial factors in the destruction of the sophisticated ancient economy. The author argues that the invasions by Germanic peoples, while not intended to destroy the Roman economy, were the primary cause of its collapse. The invasions disrupted trade and production, leading to a dismembering of the state. The Germanic peoples entered the empire hoping to share in its high standard of living, but ultimately caused its downfall. The author uses the metaphor of manslaughter to describe the invaders' role, as they did not intend the destruction, but their actions brought it about. The timing of decline. The timing of the decline varied regionally, with some areas experiencing a sharp drop in sophistication while others saw a more gradual unwinding. Britain experienced a very rapid decline in the early 5th century, coinciding with the withdrawal of Roman power. The Aegean region saw a dramatic end to prosperity around 600 AD, with cities shrinking and a disappearance of fine goods. Italy and Africa experienced a slower decline, likely due to the gradual unwinding of the Mediterranean-wide imperial and commercial system. The East, specifically the Aegean, saw a sudden and dramatic end to prosperity in the years around 600 AD. Cities like Corinth, Athens, Ephesus, and Aphrodisias, which had been prosperous for a long time, shrank to a fraction of their former size. Constantinople was an exception to the general decline. While it also experienced a decline in wealth and population, it maintained its status as a major city due to the buildings from its past and the greater decline of other cities. Other contributing factors. Besides invasions, other problems played a subsidiary role. The bubonic plague of 541 AD, which spread throughout the former Roman world, caused significant disruptions. The plague had a recurring impact, with multiple outbreaks that caused loss of life and further disrupted communities. The fragility of a complex economy. The chapter argues that the sophistication of the Roman economy made it vulnerable. The economy was a complicated and interlocked system, rather than a series of simple, autonomous units. Specialization and exchange, while beneficial, also made the system less adaptable to change. If the economy had been composed of simple local units with little specialization, it might have survived the troubles of the post-Roman era. However, because the Roman economy was interconnected, the disruption of one part could cause wider collapse. The impact on trade. The end of the Roman state had a significant impact on trade networks. The life of Saint Severinus provides examples of how the disintegration of Roman power disrupted daily life, making trade and the distribution of goods extremely difficult. Even local exchange was disrupted, and the import of goods from afar became very difficult. The difficulty in obtaining goods like olive oil in Noricum highlights the collapse of trade. Consequences of economic decline. The decline in the economy had a wide range of consequences. There was a sharp decline in food production. This decline in food production likely led to a steep drop in population. Archaeological surveys have found significantly fewer rural sites dating to the 5th to 7th centuries compared to the earlier Roman period. The sophisticated manufacturing industries also disappeared as a result of this decline. The author believes it likely that the post-Roman period saw a marked decline in agricultural productivity, and therefore in the number of people that the land could sustain. Critique of the idea of a golden age. The chapter pushes back against the idea that the Dark Ages were a golden age for the masses. It suggests that Roman economic sophistication, while sometimes criticized as exploitative, actually provided many benefits to those in the lower classes, such as access to high-quality goods, like pottery, and the ability to write. 7. The death of a civilization? The significance of material culture. The chapter emphasizes the importance of material objects in defining a society's complexity and well-being. It argues that items like pottery, tiles, and coins are not mundane, but are essential to understanding the sophistication of a society and the standard of living it provides. The chapter notes that a society's ability to mass-produce and distribute quality goods should be a primary measure of its sophistication. The ability of the Romans to provide high-quality items to a large number of people, across a broad geographic range, is a testament to the society's complexity. Impact on food production and population. The chapter suggests that the decline in the Roman economy likely led to a significant drop in food production and a subsequent decline in population. Archaeological surveys reveal far fewer rural sites dating to the 5th, 6th, and 7th centuries AD compared to the earlier Roman Empire, indicating a significant drop in the number of people that the land could sustain. This reduction in agricultural output is seen as a decline at the baseline of human existence. The evidence suggests that the post-Roman period saw a marked decline in agricultural productivity, further reducing the population that the land could sustain. The decline of literacy and monumental buildings. The chapter notes a decline in higher cultural achievements, such as literacy and the construction of monumental buildings, as a consequence of the economic downturn. The chapter argues that craftsmanship and skill cannot flourish in a material vacuum, with a corresponding reduction in building scale and the spread of literacy. The widespread access to writing that was present in the Roman period became very restricted, indicating a loss of intellectual and cultural complexity. Rejection of the idea of a post-Roman Golden Age. The chapter challenges the idea that the Dark Ages were a golden age for the masses by critiquing the notion that Roman sophistication benefited only the elite. The chapter suggests that while the Roman economic system may have had elements of exploitation, it also provided benefits to the wider population, such as access to well-made goods, writing, and more sophisticated housing. The author disputes the argument that the end of Roman power meant an end to exploitation, with people then enjoying a short golden age, arguing that the archaeological record simply does not support this interpretation. The author makes it clear that the post-Roman world reverted to levels of economic simplicity lower than those of pre-Roman times, with little movement of goods, poor housing, and only the most basic manufactured items. The author argues that the sophistication of the Roman period by spreading high-quality goods widely in society, had destroyed the local skills and local networks that, in pre-Roman times, had provided lower-level economic complexity. The concept of civilization. The chapter discusses the concept of civilization, noting that it has become unfashionable in modern scholarship because it is associated with notions of moral superiority. The chapter distinguishes between the term civilization, used to denote a sense of moral superiority, which it rejects, and the term as a shorthand for complex societies and what they produce, which it argues is useful. The author argues that the concept of the end of a civilization has gone out of fashion because of its association with moral judgment, and that some believe that all societies are equal in their level of sophistication. However, the author argues that by wanting to depict the post-Roman centuries as equal to those of Roman times, modern scholars have ignored the extraordinary decline in complexity that occurred at the end of the empire. A material view of civilization. The author states that the conception of Roman civilization and its demise is a material one, focused on the production and distribution of goods, rather than an emphasis on spiritual or intellectual matters. The author notes that the capacity to mass-produce high-quality goods and spread comfort makes the Roman world rather similar to modern society, with its emphasis on materialism. The chapter argues that the focus on spiritual or religious change, while important, can obscure the realities of material decline. By focusing on objects like pottery, the author seeks to demonstrate the vast differences between pre- and post-Roman material culture. End of a civilization. The author argues that in the sense of a complex society with sophisticated material culture, ancient civilization came to an end in the West with the fall of the empire. The author does not intend to suggest moral superiority, but he argues that a complex, sophisticated society, like the Roman one, can be differentiated from simpler societies. 8. All for the best in the best of all possible worlds? Shifting perspectives. The chapter begins by asking why radically different, more positive views of the post-Roman world have emerged. It notes that the traditional view of the end of the Roman world as a period of decline and collapse is still very much alive in places like Italy. The author acknowledges that his own views have been shaped by a very Roman upbringing and experience in Italy, where the primacy of ancient civilization is rarely doubted. The idea that the Germanic invasions were peaceful and did no harm has not gained traction in this traditional perspective. The rise of late antiquity. The chapter explains that the historians who argue for a more positive view of the period are primarily based in North America or in the USA, and they have shifted their focus away from the Western Roman Empire and towards the Eastern Mediterranean. Much of the evidence supporting this new, upbeat view comes from the Eastern Mediterranean, where there is good evidence for prosperity through the 5th and 6th centuries and into the 8th century in the Levant. The author notes that in a recent American guide to late antiquity, the entries were overwhelmingly focused on the East, with very few entries concerning the West, and none for the Franks, Visigoths, Britons, and Anglo-Saxons. This new view is a corrective to a previous bias that assumed that the entire Roman world declined in the 5th century because that is what happened in the West. The chapter argues that the idea of a long and rosy late antiquity is a way of examining the history of the Levant, but it distorts the history of the West after 400, and the Aegean region after around 600. The author argues that imposing a single dynamic period of late antiquity across the entire Roman world ignores dramatic changes and discontinuities in the West. Focus on religious and cultural change. The chapter observes that the late antiquity model focuses on the spread and triumph of Christianity and Islam, and the resulting changes in attitudes toward sexuality, death, and family. The new late antiquity is primarily a spiritual and mental world, almost to the exclusion of the secular and material one. The chapter points out that, in the USA, the focus has shifted from institutional, military, and economic history to a concentration on the world of the mind and spirit, primarily on different aspects of Christian thought and practice. Secular officials are given short shrift, while a host of different heretics and ascetics receive individual entries in a recent American guide to late antiquity. The Dark Ages from a religious perspective. The chapter examines a perspective that views the early Middle Ages as ages of dawn, because they witnessed the conversion of the West to Christianity, the foundation of Christian civilization, and the creation of Christian art and Catholic liturgy. The author argues that a focus on religious and spiritual changes obscures the realities of material decline. This perspective considers the period to be an age of the monks. Nationalistic interpretations. The chapter discusses how the Franks are sometimes presented as the precursors of Europe, particularly in France and Germany, with emphasis on Charlemagne and the baptism of Clovis. The author questions whether the historical Franks can really live up to such high ideals. Positive aspects of the new perspectives. While the author is critical of the new views, he acknowledges some of their positive aspects. The theory that accommodates Germanic peoples peacefully into the empire does correct the myth that the fall of the West was a struggle between two great forces, Rome and the barbarians. There was room for alliances and accommodation between Germanic tribes and Romans, and they were often at war among themselves. The concept of a long late antiquity has also been useful because the terms late antiquity and late antique do not carry the same negative connotations as Middle Ages or Dark Ages. Worries about eliminating crisis. The chapter expresses concern about a vision of the past that seeks to eliminate all crisis and decline. The author believes the end of the Roman West witnessed horrors and dislocation, and he argues that it destroyed a complex civilization and threw the inhabitants of the West back to a standard of living typical of prehistoric times. He notes that Romans before the fall were certain that their world would continue forever, and he cautions against repeating that complacency. The reality of decline. The author reasserts his position that the post-Roman world in the West experienced a genuine decline in material and economic complexity, which resulted in a lower standard of living for the vast majority.